So today was day 2 and probably going to be the biggest indicator of performance from teams from the 6 hours of Monza. So today we're going to take a look at all of that. We're going to take a look at teams' performance. We're going to take a look at the starting grid for tomorrow's race. And I'm going to make some predictions about who I think is going to be competitive and really just what I think is going to happen with the race in general tomorrow for the 6 hours of Monza. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get straight into that. So the first session of the day was free practice 2, and something I want to note on here because I think this session showed something that's pretty important. So out of the top 6 hypercars, all 6 of them were within 0.4 of a second of each other. So the fastest time, which was set by the number 8 Toyota, was a 1:37.692. The slowest time, which was set by the number 7 Toyota, was a 1:38.116. Now, a couple of things to analyze there. Really what that means, they're extremely close, and considering the field was bookended by Toyotas, it's showing that the BOP works, because when, you have 2 cars with the same BOP, they're essentially, the outer walls of that field. It shows that there's possibly a performance gap, between cars or whatever, but, you're not getting 2 cars here, 2 cars here, car here that are all, ranked essentially by BOP. It's not that even with small gaps you can tell. It's that, it's a bit of a mishmash of everything to figure out really who's the best car within each group. And you're looking as much at, individual teams instead of just looking at different cars' BOP for how much they're affected by stuff like that, essentially. So let's go ahead and get into the actual results for the session. Of course, I've already said some stuff, but yeah, let's get going. So practice 2, fastest, of course, was the number 8 Toyota with a 1:37.692. Second fastest, the number 93 Peugeot with a 1:37.775. Third, the number 708 Glick with a 1:37.961. Fourth, the number 94 Peugeot, who has their first representative time from a free practice with a 1:38.061. Fifth was the number 36 Alpine with a 1:38.082, and of course I couldn't fit it on the timing screen here, but sixth was the number 7 Toyota with a 1:38.116. Gonna go for results by class here. Of course, you had the number 22 United Autosports car was fastest in the LMP2 class with a 1:38.917. Fastest in Pro-Am was again the number 83 AF Corsa car with a 1:39.172. Fastest in GTE Pro, the number 91 Porsche with a 1:46.245. And fastest in the AM class is the number 46 Team Project 1 car with a 1:47.738. So obviously I had talked about the very small gaps in between stuff for, hypercar class. I'm going to just talk a little bit really about this for each session, and then we can talk more just in general about how the day went after we've got all the results through. Of course, I'd say from this session, you had a very good mix of hypercars throughout the top of the board. It wasn't just, ranked by each car, essentially. There wasn't a very obvious gap in between each car for, performance, which shows that the BOP formula is working. So honestly, again, I had said this race might end up like Sebring. I think that problem got fixed. I think Toyota, obviously considering there was a Toyota leading that session, I don't think you're going to end up with a situation where Toyota's almost down on pace. I think even saying it's going to be like Sebring is probably a bit wrong, because honestly, I think this race is going to be in really a category of its own in terms of close competition. I really think that between really all 4 cars, we've got quite a close competition that's been on display so far. I think out of really what we've seen, I think it's still very possible that any of the 6 hypercars could go out and win the race. So let's go ahead and get into practice 3. First, looking at the HyperCar class. Again, it was the Glickenhaus 708 fastest with a 136.813. Second fastest was the number 93 Peugeot with a 137.020. Third, the number 94 Peugeot with a 137.085. Fourth, number 8 Toyota with a 137.301. And fifth, number 7 Toyota with a 137.546. Sixth was the number 36 Alpine with a 137.644. Of course, that's not on the timing sheet. Couldn't fit it on there. Now, this is kind of somewhat what I was talking about in the last thing with, ranked essentially by cars, where there's a noticeable gap, not exactly between teams, but more of a noticeable, or not exactly within teams, but there's more of a noticeable gap between cars. You've got the Glickenhaus and then 2/10 to both of the Peugeots, another 2.5 to the 8 Toyota, and then 2/10 to the 7 Toyota, and then the Alpine was very close to the 7 Toyota. I think in one session, that's not really the end of the world. You can't look at every session where it's ranked like that and just say, well, automatically it's bad. I think right now it's, again, pretty good. But really, I'd say if you're looking for the, oh my gosh, this is so great, this is so promising, FP2 was that session. But I think still in general, very good mix here. Looking at results by class, of course, we talked about Glickenhaus fastest. Fastest in LMP2 was the number 28 Jota car with a 138.904. Fastest in Pro-Am was the number 45 Algarve Pro Racing car with a 139.250. Fastest in GTE Pro was the number 64 Corvette. For the first time, they've led a session this weekend with a 145.902. And fastest in GTE AM was the number 54 AF Corsa Ferrari with a 147.676. We'll go ahead and move on to qualifying. First up was the GTE cars. So, fastest in GTE Pro, and I'll go ahead and read these off, although I don't have a graphic made for it. Fastest in GTE Pro was the number 51 AF Corsa with a 145.270. Second was the number 64 Corvette with a 145.324. Third was the number 52 AF Corsa car with a 145.328. Fourth, the number 91 Porsche with a 145.804. And fifth, the number 92 Porsche with a 146.024. Fastest in GTE AM was the Iron Dames number 85 driven by Sarah Bovey with a 147.431. Second was the number TF Sport 33. Third was the number 77 Dempsey Proton car. Fourth, the number 21 AF Corsa car. And fifth, the number 54 AF Corsa car. Just looking at these results, I'll talk about Pro first. Looks like Ferrari was fast. It looked like at certain points during the weekend, Ferrari might have been the slower team out of the 3 GTE Pro teams, but it seems like, at least for now, they've had that resolved. They were talking about having some overheating issues in at least FP3. I wasn't awake, actually, for FP2, since that was happening at 4 in the morning here. But they were having some heating issues in FP3 that apparently they've had at certain points throughout this year. Seems they got that figured out, at least for qualifying, though, a 10-minute session isn't exactly the thing where you'd have any non-major heating issues show up. But they put their cars first and third. Of course, the Corvette was splitting them in second, and they were all within a tenth of a second. So very close battle up at the top of the GTE Pro field. Oddly enough, the 2 Porsches were fourth and fifth, which is quite odd considering that I believe, and I can check this to confirm here, but in all but one of the free practice sessions, the Porsche had the fastest time, and of course in FP3 they were second fastest behind the Corvette. So odd to see them 5/10 and 7/10 down respectively for the 91 and the 92 car off of the fastest time, possibly just a qualifying pace thing. I think, in FP1 and FP2 where you're seeing some generally more race-oriented times, they were fastest, so not a major worry for Porsche, but it is definitely interesting to see that they were slower. Moving on to the GTE AM field, it was of course cool to see the all-female Iron Dames entry with Sarah Bovey taking the pole in GTE AM. looking at that, we're just seeing some generally different teams up at the front there. Of course, you've got Ben Keating in the TF Sport Car, Dempsey Proton in the 77. Team Project One, who had really been a lot, they had led in FP1 and FP2, were 7th and 9th in the GTE Pro field for qualifying here. So at least it looks like for qualifying, they might not be on pace as much as they are in the race. So that'll be interesting to see in the GTE Pro field. Or GTE, that's about the 5th time I've done that, like, throughout these videos. I keep calling it Pro. But in the GTE AM field, of course, AM is a little bit less, defined. It seems like with things like amateur drivers switching out from pro drivers, you get a lot of change throughout that field. So, of course, it's somewhat hard to gauge, just past looking directly at results, how different people are going to do. Of course, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. It's cool to see that Iron Dames was able to get the pole. That was definitely an interesting moment. Let's go ahead and move on to the prototypes qualifying, which they had qualified separate, which is just something the WEC does for everywhere except Le Mans. Fastest and taking the pole for the 6 hours of Monza was the number 708 Glickenhaus with a 135.416. Glick has really been on pace this weekend. Obviously, they had gotten a power boost to 933 kilowatts of power. I'm not exactly sure how that's calculated, because I'm pretty sure kilowatts is an electric thing and they're not a hybrid team, but that's just how the WEC calculates power, I guess. But they had gotten a power boost before going to Monza, and of course, at a track like Monza, you are really going to see that show up. So Glick took the pole by 9/10 over the number 8 Toyota at a 136.335. Third fastest is the number 36 Alpine with a 136.489. Fourth, the number 7 Toyota with a 136.919. And fifth, the number 94 Peugeot with a 137.253. Now, the number 93 Peugeot was having some type of gearbox, I think, issue with the car. They didn't get any laps in at all, and actually at the end of the session ended up causing a red flag from being stopped on the track. That ended up ending the session about a minute and a half early. So, just from that, obviously Peugeot having a little bit of issues, of course, when you're talking about mechanical issues, though it's not surprising from a new team. One other thing about Peugeot and their new car, the only other noticeable issues they've been having this week is seemingly just really big lockups at certain points into braking zones. Of course, it's Monza, so you have big braking zones like this, and the track isn't exactly the smoothest of circuits. It's a bit of a worn-out track, so stuff like lockups can be easy to have, but it seems like it's an issue that's somewhat specific to the Peugeot, at least compared to the other hypercars, that they've been having a lot, at least a lot more big lockups into corners, just going straight on through braking zones and spewing smoke from the tires. Just situations like that likely just stem from certain things about how they've tested their car and the conditions in which they've tested their car, that they might have to make some adjustments for. Because essentially what they've said is the tracks they've been testing out are very, smooth and newer surfaces and stuff like that, tracks like Portimao, and Monza isn't that as much. So certain setup changes that they might not have expected to have to make, seems like they might end up having to do. So just Peugeot's, of course, as you would always have, is having some somewhat issues, just kind of figuring out the kinks with their car at new tracks with a bunch of cars around them for the first time. General stuff you'd expect from a new team, of course. So they'll be starting 5th and likely at the back of the prototype field. So, of course, just looking at starting position, that's not optimal, but I wouldn't exactly worry if I was Peugeot. They showed pace in practices, and just in general, they've seemingly been, at least on pace enough to the point where I wouldn't be majorly concerned. Looking down at the P2 results, fastest in the P2 class was the number 22 United Autosports car with a 138.403. fastest in the P2 Pro-Am class and second fastest in P2 overall was the number 44 ARC Bratislava car with a 138.731. Third quick in P2 was the number 41 WRT car with a 138.780. Fourth quick in P2 was the number 83 AF Corsa car with a 138.817. And fifth, the number 45 Algarve Pro car with a 139.122. There's a lot of Pro-Am cars up there, 3 out of the top 5, which is odd considering that's 3 out of the 4 Pro-Am cars. But out of this, I'd say it's interesting. I definitely wasn't expecting to see Bratislava that high up. Of course, AF Corsa has been generally on pace throughout this weekend, so that's not a surprise. United Autosports on pole. They've been pretty quick in practices. So I'd say some of the people that are up there, of course, Real Team WRT, pretty quick. I'd say those are the type of people you're going to want to watch out for on race day. United Autosports, WRT, Prema is up there in 6th. They're generally competitive. Those kind of teams are going to be the people in P2, just as always, that you're going to see are going to be the most competitive. So that's really most of what I have for results stuff. I'm just going to go ahead and do a little bit of a more general overview about how the day's gone and how I think, the race tomorrow is going to work out. I think, at least for hypercars, it's going to be a very entertaining race. I think we've got 6 hypercars that are very close to each other on race pace, especially when you're talking about FP2, which is probably the most indicative session for race pace, because that's most of what teams are focusing on there. I think it's going to be a very close race. I wouldn't be surprised if Peugeot ends up losing at least one of their cars due to some type of mechanical issue. We've seen it from a lot of other new teams that, it's with a new car, it's first time ever that they've been able to do stuff with it. There's just a lot of problems they haven't, been able to see in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up losing a car at some point for some reason, but of course I wouldn't hope that they would. But with the mechanical issues they've been having, it's just a thing to consider at least. Glickenhaus is fast. Honestly, and I hate to say this because this is like a meme at this point, but I think Glickenhaus might be the favorite to win the race tomorrow because they've been fastest in all but one of the sessions and they're on pole. I really think Glickenhaus has the race pace right now. They definitely have the 1-lap pace. And as long as stuff like fuel consumption doesn't become an issue compared to the Toyotas, I really think that Glick at least has a chance to be competitive tomorrow. I wouldn't be surprised if Toyota, as seems like they always do, are able to, pull out some type of crazy, strategy that they're just able to drive off into the distance and no one has an answer for it. But I really think Glickenhaus at least has the pace right now. I haven't really talked much about Alpine. It seems like they're the one, they so far have been the one team that just kind of gets left out of discussions because they've been, middle of the hypercar class throughout really all the sessions. I wouldn't be surprised if Alpine is on the podium tomorrow. I think they're probably going to end up somewhere around 3rd or 4th from what we've seen right now. Of course, they have a little bit less stint energy than the Glickenhaus does. So, stuff like pit stops, they're going to end up continuing to lose just a bit of time to the, actual LMH cars compared to, just being an LMP1 that's grandfathered in. But I think Alpine just kind of mid-pack right now. There hasn't been anything majorly, outstanding that we've seen from them. But then again, it's a really close battle in hypercar. If Alpine's even sandbagging a little bit, they could go out and win by some crazy margin because, I think at this point, the main point that I have to make is that anyone could win. And at this point, it's looking like, at least it's not going to be some Toyota dominance race like you've seen a lot of in the past. I'm just excited for tomorrow because I really think that this is going to be a good race for the hypercars. And especially considering that we've got Peugeot, this is literally their first race ever in the hypercar class. It's good to see that they're right off the bat competitive. I think it's going to be fun to watch, and I think we have a really good battle on our hands in the HyperCar class. So just talking about the GTE field here, I really still think it's going to be Porsche in the race tomorrow, despite the fact that they're starting 4th and 5th. I think they've generally shown some more race pace. So I wouldn't be surprised if Porsche is able to kind of work their way up through the field and be a little bit more competitive than what we had seen in qualifying. Corvette's somewhat up there, and Ferrari seems to be having some type of heating issues, so, that could depend on the weather tomorrow, honestly, how well they do. But, I think if I had to pick a favorite right now, it'd probably be Porsche, but I think, of course, anyone still has a chance. But, yeah, that's about all I have for right now. We've got a really exciting battle on our hands with HyperCar. I think the BOP that the WC is using right now, at least at Monza, is perfect. It's a really close battle. I think it's great to have Peugeot in here, and it's great to see that Glickenhaus is able to be somewhat competitive. What would be funny, considering there's a lot of people saying that they might end up missing either or Fuji or Bahrain. If they end up winning, I wonder how much that changes that chance. It'd be interesting. I really want to see at least one Glick at every race throughout the end of the year this year. Of course, the 709 is a Le Mans only entry, so you're not even going to get that, even if they go out and dominate. But it'd be interesting to see, even if winning can just be a financial help for Glickenhaus. That's a really big barrier for them to break, honestly. If they do end up winning tomorrow, which it's a very close battle, but at least looks like it's possible more than any other race this year. If Glick wins, I think it's a really big barrier for them to break, and I think it'll be very interesting to see just how that changes the landscape of HyperCar for the rest of the season, at least, for Glickenhaus. I guess, really, to be honest, what we've seen is that even with the probably lessening BOP for, the future, once you start getting more teams from LMDH and stuff, and people like Ferrari coming in, it looks like Glick is at least going to be able to be somewhat competitive. It was looking at places like Le Mans, where you might end up seeing that Glickenhaus would be off the back of the HyperCar field, and that was starting to be possibly a concern, but at least at tracks like Monza, where it looks like the Glickenhaus is generally a lot quicker, it looks like they could be competitive. For Le Mans, of course, you don't know. It seems like they've been honestly somewhat slow at Le Mans compared to some other tracks. It seems like the really big speed tracks like Le Mans and, not Le Mans, like Monza and Spa, they've been quite competitive. Of course, they were on pole at both of those places this year. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Glickenhaus tomorrow and in the future. So that's about all I have. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll, of course, have a race review video out tomorrow, probably about the 6 hours of Monza. It'll be really exciting to watch. I think if you can, you should tune in, because it's probably going to be the most interesting HyperCar battle we've had in the past 2 years. And honestly, the most interesting top class battle we've had since probably 2016 or 2017. I think this weekend has been really promising for the HyperCar class in the World Endurance Championship. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you all tomorrow. Bye.